They started organizing meetings for people who were adopted from Ethiopia and Eritrea, because when we were adopted, Ethiopia and Eritrea were the same country. And for me personally, I don't know where I would have been today without this group. I think I would never have dared get close to my Ethiopian heritage. I made a return trip when I was 29, and then someone says, "Oh, look, you were born in this hospital." So I had been told, my parents had been told, that there was no name, but all of a sudden there is a name.
For today's video, we have Hanna here, and she's a psychologist and adoptee from Sweden, and we're going to hear all about her perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and to see you guys and to talk to you guys. I almost don't know what to say. I'll just start with a little of my background. I was born in 1971, so I'm very old. And I was born, as far as I know, in Addis Ababa. And then there are all these different things where we don't know what is what, but the story I've been told is that my biological mother died while from some kind of delivery complications, and that I was at some point taken to an orphanage, the Haile Selassie First Foundation Children's Home. When I was about 3 months old, my Swedish adoptive parents, they were going to travel to Ethiopia and some other African countries because they had some scholarships they were studying. They were going to go there, and they had, for some reason, started thinking about adopting. And I can get back to the reasons for adopting from different countries in Sweden. But anyway, so they went there, they met me at the orphanage and said, yes, we'll be happy to adopt her. And then they had all their work with their scholarships to do. And so someone took care of the paperwork. And 3 months later, as I was 6 months old, they came back and brought me with them to Sweden. And I was then taken as a child for foster care. And then yet another 2 years later, the adoption papers came through in Sweden and in Ethiopia. So there was a court decision in both Ethiopia and here. That's the story that I've been raised with. And what my parents were told was that there was that my biological mother, she came in unconscious to the hospital, and because she was unconscious, no one could know her name, and then she died. So for that reason, there was no one to connect with. So that was what I was raised with and what I believed throughout, for my entire childhood and youth. I didn't really think very much about myself as an adoptee. At that time in Sweden, there were a lot of people who considered adopting, and not so many in the 1960s and 70s, but during the 80s and 90s, it was very common. I would say people who are somewhere between 30 and 50 in Sweden today, most of them have had at least one adoptee, transnational adoptee, in their classroom as they grew up. It was really, really common. And today we have had about 60,000 transnational adoptees to Sweden, and we're a country of 10 million people. And there were different reasons. Of course, the main reason for most people to adopt has always been that they, for some reason, were not able to conceive biologically. But there was also an idea of solidarity and wanting to help children in other countries. And then there has also been, in some families, a tradition of Christian missionaries who traveled and who came to different places all over the world. Perhaps they got to know this family and wanted to help a family, but sometimes, this whole adoption process. And of course, you know about all the things that we know today about the global adoption industry that it actually turned into. Sweden is a little bit different from many other countries. We were not taking part of World War II. We exported a lot of iron, for example, which meant Sweden was rather wealthy after the Second World War, where many other countries were not. It made a lot of sense to many here to think, we've got so much, we're so fortunate, let's give some of what we have to those who do not. And I think it's important to remember this was not a time of internet. This was a time when people traveled elsewhere. They took like photographs, just a few because it was expensive, and they came back and they showed the pictures and they said, look, this is what it looks. And they told their stories. And so I think many were struck by the poverty, diseases, and the differences in culture that they met, and thought it was both probably upsetting and partly scary, but also exotic and exciting. Another part of Swedish history is we were really big with eugenics. We were really big in like the 1950s, thinking that whites are on top of everything, especially Swedes. And then there's the whole hierarchy. Even though we changed our mind and decided, no, this is not, this doesn't make sense. This is not a science. We do have a history of believing it was a science. I think that in Sweden, we never really worked it through. We never really talked about this. We just realized this is wrong, this is bad. Of course, all human beings are created equal. And so we just wanted to, erase that and say, okay, but now let's be nice. Let's do good things. Therefore, I think we never really dealt with racist perceptions of people in other countries. We have been open, curious, interested, but sometimes there's been like a little glitch between reality and how we perceive ourselves. I think it was very difficult for Swedes to imagine that any child would want to stay in Ethiopia when they could come to Sweden, because what they saw on TV was that people were poor, people were starving, and they looked unhappy. And we were wealthy, I believe, and not only Ethiopia, but in many of the countries, like the countries that we did adopt from, were mainly countries with a lot lower incomes. India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Chile, trying to do something good and help children who they believed were orphaned and orphans, and who they believed had no one in the world who wanted or could take care of them. So this has been the narrative in Sweden on what international adoptions are about. So as I grew up, I was like, I constantly met people who said, aren't you happy you've been adopted to Sweden if you come from Ethiopia? And I was like, yeah, I am. And I was. I mean, I like my parents, I like my sister. Why wouldn't I be happy? At the same time, I could meet really racist perceptions, and people would say racist slurs, and there was not a language for this. So I would think, yeah, it's really unfortunate that I'm African. It would have been so much better if I wasn't, but now I am. So I'm sorry about that, but I'll do my best to be a good Swede. I would say I really internalized a very, very negative self-image on my African parts. And this also meant that if I occasionally, which was very rare at the time, but if I did meet anyone with an African background, I felt no reason to talk to them. It would be like, if I talk to you, everyone will see that I'm Black. So I kept them a bay. And therefore there was no one to give me a better picture. My adoptive parents would say, like, would you like to go back? Would you like to go to Ethiopia? And I would be like, why would I want to go there? And so they said, okay, we'll wait. And then just to say something about when this changed, that was when I was about 20, 25. We had a lot of more non-European immigration to Sweden. So all of a sudden, I would meet people with African backgrounds in the streets, and not only African, but from all kinds of countries, like also from the Middle East, especially. And they would, of course, try to initiate a conversation with me and like try to speak Amharic to me. And I would be like, no, look, no. And then there would be white supremacists Like, we had the skinheads here. It was very easy to identify them because they would really dress up in their skinhead outfits, and they were really aggressive. They were like very outspokenly racist, and many adoptees and other people who were immigrants that were non-white have talked about how they were chased, how they were beaten, and like really horrifying situations. And I think for the majority Swedes, the normative Swedes, they had no idea what we were actually going through because we were not organized. Non-white people in Sweden were not at all organized. But at this time, there was this man here in Sweden, young man, who, together with two young women, they had met actually when they made a return trip to Ethiopia, and they said we should organize. And so they started organizing meetings for people who were adopted from Ethiopia and Eritrea, because when we were adopted, Ethiopia and Eritrea were the same countries. We call it the Association of Ethiopian and Eritrean Adoptees in Sweden. It was founded in 1996, but by then we had already met for like 1 or 2 years. I was very, very skeptical. I thought this was super strange. What are we going to do? Because he kept like inviting me. We had a common friend, and he kept inviting me, and I was like, what kind of person is he? And then finally I went to one of those meetings, and I was like, are we going to sit like, I am so adopted? But I went there and it turned out that everyone was completely normal. We were totally different. We had totally different experiences. We were working with different things. And so I was quite interested, and I came back and I came back. And then after a while, someone said, like, is there any one of you who's like ever experienced like racism? And it was just a little quiet. And then someone said, I think I might have. Me too. I think maybe I have. And then one person was like, of course I have. We were so used to having our experiences minimalized, made invisible. We had all been brought up, taught that we don't have racism here. So I don't know what your problem is. Maybe you did something, or maybe you misunderstood, or maybe you're a little bit sensitive, or maybe oh, that was probably a joke. You know, you have to be able to take a joke. As we were sitting there and I looked around and I heard all of them say the same kind of things and describe experiences that I had had too, I was like, but there's nothing wrong with them. I always, because I always assumed there was something wrong with me and that was why I was experiencing this. But I knew there was nothing wrong with them and they were having the same experience. So that's actually why I was like, I'd like to study psychology. I'd like to understand this better. And so that's how I got stuck with these issues, and I'm still not unstuck. It's still a very active association. We're about 1,200 adoptees in Sweden who've come from Ethiopia, and our association only, I think we're like 150. I would say in a way we're a pretty small group in Sweden, but I'm very proud of our association because I think we have really managed to stay together almost 30 years. I think we really have had so many interesting and valuable discussions and tried to raise our voices in this society. And I think sometimes we've actually managed to. And for me personally, I don't know where I would have been today without this group, because I think I would never have dared like get close to my Ethiopian heritage if I had not had this kind of bridge. Yeah. In my case, it says in my court papers that there was an ad in the newspapers. Not what newspaper, not what date, nothing. There was an ad in the newspapers. No one got in touch, and therefore we decide this child is orphaned. There was also a law saying that when an adoption has been approved by the Swedish court, it's been approved. So if like an Ethiopian family says, no, we disagree, then it's too late. But there was no family that we know of that opposed in any way. My orphanage was my legal guardian when I was adopted. I made a return trip in 2000 when I was 29, and we managed to get hold of some papers. Now, the problem was I was not searching for my roots. I was just following someone else who was searching her roots, but we had been at the same orphanage. So as we were there looking for her papers, we checked my papers, and then someone says, "Oh, look, you were born in this hospital, St. Paul's Hospital." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, it was torn down." And they were like, "No, yeah, it was torn down because the person who brought me here had told me it had been torn down." And they were like, "Yeah, or maybe it just is still there. Let's go there." And I was like, "Really?" And so we went there, and of course it was still there. They knew what they were talking about. And I was fortunate enough to actually find some midwives that were helpful, and we were able to check this huge ledger. And I had in my papers my birth weight and my birth length and my birth date. So we were actually able to check the ledger, and they said, "Yeah, it says right here, this is your mother's name." So I had been told, my parents had been told that there was no name, but all of a sudden there is a name. And unfortunately, that was all there was. And after that, I haven't found anything more. But it just tells me that some things were not conveyed, and that my adoption papers are not entirely correct. With what we know today, that leaves me with a lot of questions. This is the story of many of us, that there are just these question marks all over the place, and that's all we have. And yes, I've DNA tested, and no, I haven't found anything. And yeah. And I think for me personally, like I'm 54 now, I couldn't have cared less for my first 25 years. And now I've had another 25 years wandering. I am now at a point where I'm like, okay, so I will probably never know. And I really don't like it, but I think I need to accept it because I don't see how is this going to change? The ones who'd been adopted from Korea, they were first, and they had been here already from the 1950s. So they were actually the first to organize themselves. But you know what it's like in some adoptive families? There's like one child from South Korea, one from Vietnam, and one from Ethiopia. So I think that also contributed to the idea for someone to think, well, if the South Koreans can have an association, why can't we? And then there were three individuals, three adoptees, who had gone on their return trips to Ethiopia and who met there and said, we should organize ourselves. And so when they came back, and this was in early 1990, they started to gather people who they knew of. One of them, who is the founder, I would say, Daniel Rosenlind, he would walk up to people in the street and say, "You look like you come from Ethiopia, you must be adopted." Because at that time in Sweden, no one would be our age and look this way. So we were pretty easy to identify. At the same time, during the early 90s, we had a lot of immigrants coming from Ethiopia, but most of the time they were a little older than we were. And so he would ask people and say, "Are you adopted? You know what? We have this group. We're trying to sort of meet, see if maybe we have something in common, if we can meet and maybe eat a piece of Ethiopian food and maybe listen to Ethiopian music," and so on. When he approached me, I thought he was really strange. I was a little worried that maybe he was hitting on me or something. So because as I grew up in a very, very white world. Being from Ethiopia, that was just, I came as a 6-month-old child. So I had no references at all to Ethiopia. The only references I had were like from TV with people who were starving and who were sick and who had AIDS and whatever. I remember him saying, "But you could come and we could just have some Ethiopian tea." And I was like, "Ethiopian tea? What's that?" You know, I've heard of coffee, like Ethiopian coffee, but Ethiopian, this is, ugh. But he knew a friend of mine, so he worked her, and that way I finally decided to come meet this group. Of course, we were all very different. I am so happy that one of the things that we decided on very early on was that we wanted this group to be inclusive, and we wanted it to be a group where you could join the group and be a person who felt that the adoption is the worst thing that has happened to me. This has destroyed everything for me. And you could join the group and be a person who felt like this is the best thing. This is I couldn't be more grateful. That was really important, and that is something that has been really important for me, to try to keep that inclusive way of holding the space. Of course, not everybody thinks we've succeeded, but I think a lot of us actually feel that this is a group where it's possible. So we were in our 20s, so we had a lot of parties. We were very, very fortunate. We were situated in Stockholm, and there was this amazing man who started a restaurant, an Ethiopian restaurant. This was unheard of here. I had never heard of an Ethiopian restaurant. I thought that was like, there's an old and disgusting joke from when I met Sally, like, I didn't know they had food there about Ethiopia. Yeah, that's how awful, how like ignorant I was. But how could I be anything else when there were no role models, there was no one for us to look up to here. He opened a restaurant, and he was like a father to us, like, or a grandfather. He would always welcome us. We were always welcome. We were always welcome to have our meetings there. He just really created a space for us, and I don't think he knows how important that was. But his restaurant, Ethio Star, really became our playground, where we would meet, where we would have parties, where we would celebrate, where we would meet for dinner, where we could both meet as the whole association, but where we could also, like, if some of us made closer connections and became friends and wanted to meet and want to talk, we could always go there, have a meal, have a conversation. So I think that has actually played such an important part in the whole history of our association. We were so different, and we had so many different needs. So we also organized different events. So we would have lectures. We would invite people who had worked in Ethiopia, who had been there, who could talk about that. We would have like members of our association tell us about like their story, how they had found their biological family. We had cooking courses. We've had dancing classes. So we've really tried to sort of make it possible to learn a little bit about our culture and our background, and also to get different perspectives. We also had events where we've just sat and talked on a topic. And then in 2003, there was an inquiry made in Sweden on transnational adoptions. Like, should we keep doing them? What is good about them? What is not so good? And at the same time, there were some really big studies that came out that showed that there was a lot of mental ill health within the group of transnational adoptees. And so that was also reason, of course, for this inquiry to be made. As that was being made, we also organized ourselves politically and decided that we need to advocate for our issues and to ask for instance, some kind of resource center where they could collect like studies and research on adoptees, where we could perhaps get help from professionals who would be specialized in issues around adoptions. Unfortunately, a lot of the inquiry was excellent, came with a lot of good suggestions, but unfortunately, most of them were denied by the parliament. Many people at that time said, well, there's nothing different about being an adoptee than being anyone else, which was not, like the inquiry said, becoming a parent becoming an adoptive parent, it is not the same thing as becoming a biological parent. It's not better or worse, but it's different. But even so, the idea that there would be anything different with the adopters' children, that was no, that was not. It was said like, if you have ADHD, you can get treatment for ADHD. If you have a depression, you get treatment for depression. But being a person who's been adopted, that is not a disease. So no need for any extra support, which was very unfortunate. What they did do was that they decided that there had to be a special education for people who wanted to become adopters. At least one group of potential adoptive parents who decided not to go through with their adoptions after they had gone through the courses. So that was good, and it was a mandatory course. As adoptees from Ethiopia and Eritrea, the group has also meant that some of us have been able to advocate our issues and work politically as activists, but not all of us. Some of us prefer just going to the parties and dinners and having fun and meeting new friends and going for the summer picnic or letting our children meet at some gatherings. And I'm super proud to be a member of it, because I think we've really had an impact, actually, in the Swedish society, and we've been really good at organizing ourselves, and we've really worked hard to keep it a democratic organization. We've always had a board. We've had crises. We had a really bad crisis where someone committed fraud to our financial situation within our organization, but we pulled through with our democratic. We used our democratic tools, and we actually managed to keep the keep the ship floating. And it is now really, I would say, a healthy and thriving organization. And I mean, we were in our 20s, and now we're in our 50s. I don't know how many times we've said someone should have documented this.
Yeah.
Some people, I have stuck with it. For me, it's been super important. But a lot of members have come and gone. And some years we've had several events. Some years we've had one. It's up to us what it becomes. There was a long period when most of us had small children. At that time, we met maybe twice a year. We have a picnic in May, because in Sweden we're very conscious about the weather. So May is a time where we have spring and a little warmth, and everyone is very happy. People start talking to each other. It's very nice. Just before Christmas, we also have an annual gathering where we have special, traditional Swedish things. But that's just a gathering, often at someone's home or at that restaurant. Sometimes the gathering has only been to go to the Ethiopian restaurant and meet and have dinner. We've joined a film festival, if they've had a screening of an Ethiopian film, for instance. I believe that a lot of those who decided to adopt in the 70s and 80s, which is the time when most of us in our association have been adopted, were people who were more or less invested in issues of equity. Some missionaries, a lot of healthcare workers. Many of us grew up in kind of similar homes. A lot of good values, I would say, but also sometimes kind of a patronizing mentality, since they cannot themselves, since they are not as civilized as we are, we need to help. So white saviorism too. That was something that many of us experienced during our childhood. And also, this was a mentality that was common in the Swedish society. Many of us met the attitude of, oh, are you adopted? Oh, your parents are so nice. Oh, all these comments that really taught us something about the expectations of what we would become when we grew up, the expectations of how grateful we should be, how how wonderful our parents were. We were met with quite a lot of the same, which I think made it easier for us once we found each other. Because when we talked to each other, it was like, oh, you have the same experiences I do? You too? Oh, you've heard that comment? I have too. Oh, I thought that was something that was wrong with me, but that means you and you and you and you. Oh, but that means maybe it's not me, maybe it's something in society. So that was, at least for me, that, as I think I said when we met last, that was a real revelation to me. Then we've grown together in this society that is now, unfortunately, getting more and more similar to the situation in the United States, even though it's not the same. But we are getting much more polarized here in Sweden as well. Like, really, the differences are just changing by the minute. For most of us who've been adopted, especially from Ethiopia, or actually Africa, I think the attitudes towards us from society are still quite similar. So we're still facing like the same kind of something that gives us a common ground, is that we're all struggling with the same society. Some of us are actually living in families with parents or siblings who are on the far right wing, who hold really racist beliefs and opinions. But I think the majority of us still live in families where we're more left wing. But I think it's like super important. Like, okay, so we don't have to solve all the problems by ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think one really important thing is, absolutely, like, South Korea is in such a totally different position compared to Ethiopia. The whole situation is very different. But they are also the nation that has given away most children for transnational adoptions.
Yeah.
So what they do really matters. And we would be stupid not to just look at them and tag along, like, and point to them and say, look, this is what they do in South Korea. What are the crumbles that we can bring from their table? That's one of the things. I remember so clearly about 1996. I was talking to an adoptee, also from Korea. And he said, you know what? My life mission is to make transnational adoptions stop completely. And I thought he was really crazy. I couldn't understand why. I think it was like some extremist. And I said, wow. And he said, yeah, but I don't think that will happen during my lifetime. And right now we're watching it happen in Sweden. And he's only 55. It was unthinkable at the time. That was 30 years ago. And yes, in a way, 30 years is a real long time, and it's been moving slowly, but look where we are. This has really taught me that you never know. You never know what changes will come, what will be the tipping point, what will make something turn, what will change the way that we talk about things. So, for instance, with the South Korean adoptees, who are really highlighting the whole situation that you have in the United States with people who don't even have the papers, who don't even have the citizenship, and their work will be of great importance for other adoptees. So that's, I think that's really very bad, and I think that's the way that we've done it here in Sweden. We looked at it's as if they were our older sisters and brothers, that we were like, oh, can you do that? Okay, we can have an association too. Oh, you have parties? We'll have parties. That's how we do it. We try to look at those who are older and smarter and wiser and copycat as well as we can. And then sometimes we come with our own ideas. Like, that is, and that is also something that I would like to say. Like, I understand that in a way you're much more dispersed in your countries because your countries are so big. But at the same time, I mean, you have access to the internet. We were using like old telephones, like,
oh my God.
Are you home? Yeah. Oh. And I mean, this space that you guys are creating, it's, I mean, wow. I think it's amazing. And like, remember to also give yourselves cred and give yourselves rest. We see so much burnout in activism. So that's also been something that we've been working a lot with within our association. you know, always just remember we can't do everything. If we can create spaces where people are allowed and feel free to come closer to their origin in their tempo, in whatever way that is possible for them, because I think also, like, remember, when we have been adopted, the narrative is no one wanted you. No one wanted you. You were orphanaged because no one wanted you. And then you had the good fortune of being saved by someone who said, okay, I will do the dirty job, and I will take this child and bring it to me, and I'll be good with this child. If you grow up in such an environment, these are the only people in the world who wanted anything to do with me. That's what you're going to believe. And if they say being African is really unfortunate, it's something bad, it's something to be ashamed of, try to be American, for example, try to be as white as possible. Then, like, if there's a group saying, hey, you should be with us, we're really strong activists and we think adoptions are problematic, you're going to say, yeah, say thank you, shut up. But if you realize, like, okay, so people here understand that we can have different experiences, well, then maybe they will come around and they will be interested and they will come and they will meet you and they will see. I mean, these are literally the thoughts that I had. Oh, these people seem really totally civilized. It's so embarrassing, I'm blushing all over because I'm so ashamed that was my thought, but that was my thought. Because many of us have been raised. We are colorblind and you need to assimilate and you have to be as much like us as possible. And we don't see color, so you should not see color. And now you just go ahead and be just like any old Johnson or Smith or whatever. And we have changed your name. Here are some products to change your hair, maybe your skin color. Here are some clothes. No one will think about you being black. Just don't act black. Just don't act black. That's what people grow up with. I think there are so many ways. And I think, for instance, this space that you are creating, when you are being inclusive and when people hear you discuss, and in a way you're reinventing yourselves, you're presenting yourselves as you are, not according to the stereotypes, which is going to be an eye opener for people. And then someone will say, did you see this? And they will send a link and someone will say, oh, this is interesting, and they'll tell someone else. And so this is how we build. We need to be all our different individuals with all our different capacities. We'll just have to uh, have a little faith in ourselves, actually,
Oh, I love that.
because
Yeah.
yeah, but I really really believe in it. I mean, look at you guys. I mean, what you're doing, it's amazing. Who would have thought? Who, if someone had told me when I was 10, look, there'll be a day when you'll be sitting talking on something called the internet with people living in different parts of the world, also being adopted from Ethiopia. And you will be talking about what it's been like and what you can do in the future. I would have been like, yeah, yeah. And then I'll take my airplane to the moon. I'm stupid. And here we are. I think it's really important to sort of get to know all our different parts. Like, I have this part that's really critical. I have this part that refuses to look back. I have this part that only wants to look ahead. And then I have this part that really wants to, go about and think about things that happened in the past forever and ever. And I really believe that we have a lot to gain if we are able to accept the fact that we have all these parts and sort of stand in the middle and try to negotiate them.
We didn't really talk too much about you, like your personal life, but I know that you have 4 kids.
Yes.
And you're a psychologist. We didn't how do you manage like work?
Okay. So I live in a country that is very, very child friendly. So we have free daycare, more or less. We pay a small, small amount. We have free daycare. We have free university. So you just you just take those two things and run with that. We have free healthcare. Uh, yeah. So it's easy here in comparison. And I have a partner, I have a lovely partner who I took the first years, and then when I wanted to study, he was the one who brought in the income, and then he's been home a lot with them as they've grown old. When I wanted to go start my own business and my own private practice, he said, okay, it's my turn now.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Hannah. I loved
Thank
Yes.
you.
I loved talking with you. It's always I feel so like lucky that we get to talk to you and you know that you're like in our community.